News of the Times. Strangled by a Rejected Love. The 1909 Cornwall murder mystery of Emily Tredrea. Welcome to News of the Times. In 1909, the quiet Cornish village of St Erth was shaken by a brutal murder that stunned the community. 16-year-old Emily Tredrea was strangled in cold blood by a rejected lover, a crime witnessed by her younger brother. What followed was a sensational trial that revealed obsession, betrayal, and tragedy at the heart of a small mining community. In this episode of News of the Times, we uncover the shocking details of Emily's short life, the man who could not accept rejection, and the grim path to justice that ended on the gallows. Join us as we revisit this haunting Edwardian case, a story of love turned deadly. And in today's end of episode further particular segment, we meet a gallant constable who decided that defending a lady's honour included arresting a man for excessive hat-tipping and umbrella flourishing. So, brew a cup of tea, settle into your chair, and let's tumble back into the pages of history. Background. Emily Tredrea was just 16 years old in the spring of 1909, a young woman on the edge of adulthood in the quiet Cornish village of St Erth. Raised in a working-class family rooted in the mining communities of the region, Emily lived with her mother and younger siblings in a modest cottage near the foundry. Her surname, a proud mouthful of Trevethan and Tredrea, reflected old Cornish lineage on both sides. By all accounts, Emily was cheerful and dutiful, described locally as a well-conducted girl. One of her many admirers, unfortunately, was William Hampton, a local miner some 7 years her senior. He had taken an interest in Emily the year before when she was 15, and it was said that they were engaged. However, Emily's affections cooled towards William, creating an awkward situation as William was a lodger in her mother's house where she lived. William Hampton was a 24-year-old miner who had spent time working in America before returning to Cornwall. Upon his return, he worked in Camborne and lodged with the Tredrea family at St Erth, the quiet Cornish village near Penzance. Hampton lived in the same house as Emily Tredrea and her family, and he was reportedly been courting Emily, and the two were at one point engaged with her mother's blessing. However, Emily appeared to have grown increasingly cold and distant toward him in the weeks leading up to her death. By March 1909, Emily had grown uncomfortable with Hampton's attention and had made it clear she no longer wished to continue the relationship. She had reportedly told a friend she hated him, a statement that may have stemmed from uncomfortable rumours swirling around the household. Interestingly, she purportedly did not share these same feelings with her mother. Hampton, however, would not accept this. In the days leading up to the murder, he became increasingly withdrawn and unsettled. He continued to press Emily for a meeting. He tried to get her to talk. According to testimony, he had become obsessed, brooding over her rejection in silence. Unconfirmed rumour. But beneath the surface of this already harrowing tragedy, there lingered a rumour, vague, persistent, and never officially confirmed, that added an unsettling new layer to the case. William Hampton was not simply a lodger in the Tredrea home. He was said to be on particularly warm terms with Mrs. Tredrea, Emily's mother. The two were often seen in easy conversation. He was described by neighbours as trusted and familiar within the household, sharing in daily routines and family life. And yet, as the murder trial unfolded, whispers began to circulate, with Mr. Tredrea working in Johannesburg since February 1908, gone from the family home for over a year. Some claimed the bond between Hampton and Mrs. Tredrea had grown closer than merely friendliness. It was suggested quietly and without any hard evidence that the relationship may have crossed a line, that the young man in the spare room was not just courting Emily, but enjoying the deeper confidence of her mother. No such allegations were made in court. Nothing was proven, and yet one detail gave the rumour its staying power. Not long before her murder, Emily reportedly told a friend she hated Hampton. A sudden intense shift from the quiet girl's usual reserve. What had prompted such a strong feeling? Did Emily hear the gossip? Did she fear she had been drawn into a household entanglement she hadn't fully understood? Or had she simply seen another side of Hampton, a side her mother had not? We cannot know, but in a story already shadowed by obsession, rejection and violence, the possibility of betrayal within her own home lends the case a final tragic sting. And with so many cases we cover, the horror of what happened in that quiet Cornish village began not with a dramatic revelation, but with the sudden jarring shift from everyday normality into unimaginable tragedy. What unfolded that evening would leave a family shattered, a community stunned, and the local police scrambling to piece together the motive behind a senseless killing. The first reports in the press captured both the shock and the urgency of the unfolding investigation, and the disturbing details witnessed by a child. From the Evening Express, the 4th of May 1909, girl strangled, minor's alleged crime. Another tragedy is engaging the attention of the Cornish police. A girl aged 16 named Emily Tredrea at St Erth, a village a few miles east of Penzance, having been strangled. A young man who is detained by the police has, it is reported, confessed that he killed the girl. His name is given as William Hampton, aged 24, a minor who has worked in America and latterly at Camborne. The man Hampton has been lodging with the girl's mother and had been paying attentions none too welcome, it is stated, to the girl. On Sunday night, Emily returned home at about 10 o'clock, and Mrs. Tredrea left the couple together while she visited Hampton's grandmother. 3 young children were in the house, including a boy named Roland, aged 9. Hearing sounds of a struggle after he was in bed, he came downstairs, where he declares he saw his sister on the floor, held down by Hampton, who had his knee on her chest and his hands round her throat. He was at first prevented from going out, but eventually got away from the house and ran to his mother, telling her what he had seen. Mrs. Tredrea immediately returned, taking a police constable with her. She found Emily in a chair, apparently lifeless, whilst the man Hampton was missing. Artificial respiration was tried without effect, and life was pronounced extinct. When medical attention arrived, marks of violence were plainly visible on the girl's throat, and an examination showed terrible violence had been used. At about 11:30, a young man came up to 2 constables on duty in the street of Hale and stated he had murdered a young girl at St Erth and he was taken into custody. On Monday, Hampton was charged at Hale with the crime. He was remanded. As the word of Emily Tredrea's death spread beyond St Erth, newspapers began piecing together the details: a rejected engagement, a young man's obsessive affection, and a Sunday evening that ended in horror. From the Western Morning News, the 4th of May, 1909, girl strangles, alleged terrible crime by rejected lover. St Erth sensation. We record another tragedy, being that in which a young miner cruelly did his sweetheart to death, strangling her at her St Erth late on Sunday night. The victim was Emily Barnes Tredrea, who lived at St Erth, a pretty little village about 6 miles from Penzance, and the man now in custody with causing her death is William Hampton, 23 years of age, who lodged with the girl's mother. The young couple had been engaged to be married for over a year, and the man evidently had a very deep affection for the girl, but the latter's affection for Hampton underwent a change recently to such an extent as to make her to break off the relations existing between them. They were in the house together on Sunday night, and during the absence of Mrs. Tredrea, they had a conversation, in the course of which, it is stated, the girl told him she intended to have no more to do with him. This apparently exasperated the young man, so that he rushed at her and, getting her on the floor, pressed his hands on her throat until life departed. Then he hurriedly left the house and later gave himself up to the police at Hale. The principal characters. The principal characters in the sad tragedy resided in a small cottage at the end of a block of houses known as Vicarage Row, at the eastern end of the village. Apart from the alleged murderer and the victim, there were living in the house Mrs. Grace Tredrea, mother of Emily, and 3 other children: William Rowland Tredrea, aged 9 years, a girl aged 5 years, and a baby at about 12 months old. Mr. Tredrea, deceased's father, is a miner who is working in Johannesburg. He is known as a hard-working and industrious man. His elder daughter was a bright, cheerful and pleasant girl, and her disposition can well be understood from the fact recorded by one of the neighbours that she seemed to be always singing. Hampton had been abroad mining in America and returned to his native place, St Erth, in November 1907. He did not live with his father or his grandparent, but resided in this place. But for 12 months he had lodged with Mrs. Tredrea. Last week he went to work at Duluth mine. He had been engaged to Emily Tredrea for about 15 months, and this engagement lasted until Saturday night, when it is asserted it was broken off by the girl. She ceased to care for him, and actually went so far as to say she hated him, this remark being made a few days ago to a girlfriend, together with the statement that she was afraid of him and was afraid that he would kill her. The mother, however, appears to have favoured the suit and encouraged it. Be that as it may, the connection between the couple had a very tragic ending. Rejected addresses. At about 10 o'clock on Sunday night, Mrs. Tredrea was called out to go to the house of Hampton's grandmother to attend to the old lady, who suffered from a bad leg, and she left her daughter and the young man in the kitchen together. The boy Willie and the 5-year-old girl were in bed, but the baby, who started to cry as the mother was about to leave the house, had been brought downstairs and entrusted to the care of its eldest sister. in whose arms the baby was when Mrs. Tredrea went out. Apparently, the couple had an unpleasant conversation. According to a statement made by the man subsequently, the girl told him she would have nothing more to do with him, and this made him mad, and he rushed at her with the result recorded above. At all events, little 9-year-old Willie was a witness of the murderous act of his sister's lover. He was awakened by noises in the kitchen, and he got out of bed, partially dressed himself, and went down the stairs. From there he saw Hampton with his sister on the floor. The man had his knee on her body, keeping her down, and was pressing his thumbs on her throat, choking her. Naturally, the little fellow was alarmed, and his first instinct was to go for his mother. He endeavoured to leave the house with this object in view, but Hampton would not allow him, telling him that he was going out presently and he could go then. But the little fellow made the excuse that he desired to go into the garden, whereupon Hampton allowed him to leave the house. Before he went, however, Willie saw the man lift his sister from the ground and try to stand her in a corner of the room. He was not successful, as she was apparently lifeless, and then he placed her in a chair, her head falling on one side. When the boy got out of the house, he made all speed towards the house where his mother was attending to the sick relative of the man, but he had not gone many yards when he heard the door bang, and on looking back he saw Hampton leaping over the hedge near the house and running in the direction of Hale. Mother's discovery. The mother of the deceased soon arrived on the scene and was followed immediately by P.C. Ashford. They found the girl's body in a chair where she had been placed by Hampton, and the baby was fastened in another armchair, it being conjectured that the deceased placed it there while she obtained a cup of tea and some eatables. She was also consuming when the difference between her and her lover arose. The constable, assisted by Mr. Frank Travaskis, the postmaster, and Mr. Graham Travaskis, carried the body upstairs and tried to restore life by means of artificial respiration, but without success. Those who saw the unfortunate girl said she looked really awful with the marks of violence on her throat. Being satisfied that the girl was dead, P.C. Ashford commenced a search for Hampton. He was not to be found in the house, nor in the garden or outhouses immediately adjoining. By this time, the eastern part of the village was in a state of intense excitement. The news of the tragedy had quickly travelled, and the roads in the vicinity of the cottage were crowded. P.C. Ashford lost no time in securing assistance. He enlisted the services of several young men with bicycles who went to Hale, Leland, and other places in the district to acquaint the policemen there with what had occurred and to request their presence at St Erth. Dr. Davis also visited the house in which the crime had been enacted and made a thorough examination of the dead body. He found very severe injuries to the throat. So severe had been the pressure of the man's hands that the skin had been torn, and he was also found a small bruise on the left temple, which might have been caused by a blow obtained, perhaps, in a struggle. The feelings of villagers. By this time the police had obtained a full description of Hampton, and it was decided to institute a search for the missing man. Sergeant Kent organised a search party, and there was no lack of helpers in this work. The first feelings of excitement among the villagers having subsided to some extent, and those of anger against Hampton having taken their place. The local men were only too ready to assist in bringing about his capture. Had they succeeded, the murderer would undoubtedly have had a very rough handling. Hampton was evidently not so excited about what he had done as might be imagined, for he had an idea of what might befall him if he remained in the village, as shown by one of the remarks he made afterwards, that he did not give himself up at St Erth because he was afraid of what action a crowd would take if they got hold of him. The parties made diligent searches for the man. Dixie's pit, a very deep pit near the church, and the other places where he might have been in hiding were visited. Outhouses were searched, and various cottages were called at, including those of his father and other relatives, but their efforts were in vain. At 1 o'clock in the morning, P.C. Roberts arrived and reported to Sergeant Kent that Hampton was in custody at Hale Police Station. The inhabitants received the news of his detention with great relief, many having made up their minds that they would not go to bed that night unless they heard of his capture. Hampton's movements after the crime. After fleeing the house, William Hampton made his way across the fields towards Foundry near Hale and continued walking on to Copperhouse. Then, in a move that suggested both confusion and regret, he turned around and retraced his steps. Some time after midnight, just outside the police station in Hale, Hampton approached two constables on duty, P.C. Roberts and P.C. Wherry, and said something chilling. "Have you heard the news? I might as well give myself up." The officers, caught off guard, asked what he meant. Hampton replied, "I think I've killed a maid at St Erth." Asked how he had done it, he answered, "I choked her." "With what?" "With my hands." P.C. Roberts tried to keep the situation calm, suggesting that perhaps the girl wasn't actually dead, but Hampton insisted. "I think she is dead right enough. I picked her up and she couldn't stand. I put her in a chair and her head fell over. Meat came out of her mouth and her lips were black." When asked why he had done it, Hampton replied simply, "I was going with her and now she won't have anything to do with me. I suppose it was temper that caused me to do it." He was arrested on the spot and locked up in the Hale police station. A short while later, P.C. Ashford formally charged him with the wilful murder of Emily Tredrea. Hampton gave a brief final statement saying that he had been sitting in the kitchen when Emily told him she wanted nothing more to do with him. He lost his temper and attacked. Post-mortem and inquest. Yesterday afternoon, Doctors Mudge and Davis, who were accompanied by P.C. Ashford, were engaged for 2 or 3 hours on a post-mortem examination of the deceased girl. This taking place in the bedroom in which the body was placed after its removal from the kitchen on the previous evening. Mrs. Tredrea naturally is very much affected by the terrible deed, and yesterday was in a serious state of health in consequence. The accused before the magistrate. Yesterday afternoon, William Hampton, the accused man, was brought before Mr. T.R. Hopkin at Hale Police Station and charged with the wilful murder of Emily Barnes Trevathan Tredrea at St Erth the previous evening. The proceedings were purely formal, the only persons present being the accused, the magistrate, and Superintendent Barnfield and P.C. Kent. Hampton is about 5 foot 7 inches of height, medium build and clean shaven. His dark hair was parted in the middle and a long fringe of hair was trained down over his forehead. His complexion was somewhat pale, but apart from this, there were no signs that he felt his position very acutely. With William Hampton now in custody and a full confession in hand, the legal process moved swiftly. The inquest into the death of Emily Tredrea opened just days later, bringing the first formal examination of the evidence and the devastating witness account from Emily's own younger brother. From the Western Morning News, the 5th of May, 1909, the St Erth tragedy. Terrible revenge of a rejected lover. Hampton's statement to the police. The inquest on Emily Barnes Trevethan Tredrea, aged 16, at St Erth yesterday, aroused a great deal of interest in the little village where both the deceased and the young man accused of the deed were well known. The inquiry was conducted by Mr. Edward Bose in the Wesleyan School, and as many villagers as the accommodation would permit were allowed to attend. The accused, William Hampton, aged 23, a minor, attired in black, was present in charge of Police Sergeant Kent, having been brought over from Hales Police Station. The mother's story. Grace Emily Tredrea, wife of John Tredrea, gold miner, working in Johannesburg, said she lived in Vicarage Row with her children. The eldest was the deceased, and the other children were of the ages of 9, 6, and 13 months. In the past 12 months, Hampton had lived at her house. Her elder daughter became engaged to Hampton just before Christmas. Either on Friday or Saturday, she heard her daughter say she was not going with him any more. She, witness, had been looking after Mrs. Mary Hampton of Church St Erth, grandmother of the accused, and she went there on Sunday or 2 after 3 occasions. She was home in the evening at about 8 o'clock until 10 o'clock, when she left home again to go to Mrs. Hampton's, leaving in the house her daughter, the deceased, and Hampton together in the kitchen with the 13-month-old baby. The other 2 children were upstairs in bed. The little boy was not asleep. She had only been at Mrs. Hampton's house about 10 or 15 minutes when the boy came to her. She left at once to go home, and on her way met P.C. Ashford. Upon entering the kitchen, Mrs. Tredrea saw her eldest daughter slumped lifeless in a chair, her arms hanging loosely, her head tilted back against the chair's frame, and she rushed forward and spoke to her, but she received no reply. Cradling Emily's head in her arms, she and the constable worked quickly, cutting open the blouse at the neck in an attempt to revive her, but it was already too late. During the inquest, the coroner asked Mrs. Tredrea about the nature of Emily's relationship with William Hampton. The coroner: Was there any talk of an engagement with your consent? Yes. Coroner: But your daughter was rather young, wasn't she? Yes, but I was engaged myself at that age. When asked whether she had ever seen the pair quarrel, Mrs. Tredrea replied, Only a little difference, but no real quarrel. Coroner: What do you mean by a little difference? Oh, just a word or two now and then. She would get vexed if he swore. She added that her husband had been working abroad in Africa since September of 1907. What the brother saw. William Rowland Tredrea, aged 9, an intelligent lad, said he was the brother of the deceased. While in bed on Sunday evening, he heard a noise and got out and looked down over the stairs. In the kitchen, he saw his sister lying on the floor. Hampton was kneeling with one knee on her stomach, and his 2 thumbs were pressed into her throat. Continuing, he said the noise he heard was of a rattling nature. Whilst looking, he saw Hampton release his hold upon his sister's throat, but remained with his knee upon her. She then tried to breathe, but did not say anything. Hampton saw she began to breathe. He renewed the pressure of his thumbs on the throat. Witness called out to Hampton, Get back, but he didn't move. Then he, the lad, went back to the bedroom, dressed, and went down into the kitchen. Hampton was still kneeling on his sister. He then got up and dragged her from behind the door of the entrance to the kitchen. He, the witness, asked him what was the matter with Emily, and Hampton said, "She's only sick." When he told him he wanted to go out, Hampton told him to wait. Then he placed the deceased on a chair close to the door. Witness was about to open the door when Hampton pushed him back and shut the door, and again removed the body, and she had tumbled off the chair. He caught her as she was falling, then pulled from beneath the table a wicker chair into which he put her. As he was doing that, Witness opened the door and ran down to Mrs. Hampton and told his mother. After he was in the road, he heard a door shut, and upon looking round, he saw a person come from the direction of his mother's house, cross the road, and get over the hedge in the direction of Hale. Hampton's surrender. P.C. Ashford of St Erth said on Sunday at about 10:20, when in the village he heard a woman screaming. He saw Mrs. Tredrea and a little boy coming towards him. At her request, he went with them to Mrs. Tredrea's house and into the kitchen. There he saw the baby tied in a chair, and on a wicker chair was the deceased. She had on all her clothes except a hat. She was in a sitting posture with her head hanging over. The face was discoloured. The mouth, which had foamed, was partly opened, and there was a dark mark about an inch long and half an inch wide on her throat, and a slight abrasion and little blood. He relieved her chest of the clothing and felt her pulse and heart, but they appeared to have stopped beating. He placed her on the floor and tried artificial respiration. After some time, he concluded that she was dead. He then searched the house and other places for Hampton. Dr. Davis of Hale was sent for and arrived at about 11:15. Hampton's arrest. At 1 o'clock in the morning, he, Witness, and Sergeant Kent went to Hale police station and saw Hampton in custody. He cautioned him and charged him with wilful murder. He replied, "I'd better not say anything now." On him was found a gold ring and an ordinary charm, which he said had belonged to the deceased. He did not account for them being in his possession. Prisoner did say, "This is a bad job. I thought she was dead when I left. I heard the mother, Mrs. Tredrea, scream. I was then up by the vicarage fields, through Trenhale, Tolroy, and through Hale. Then I decided to give myself up." "I suppose Mrs. Tredrea is feeling very bad," Witness said. "Yes, I think she is." Hampton added, "Emily was quite dead when I left. She didn't scream when I held her down. I was hold of her too tightly for that." The accused's confession. P.C. Werry of Copperhouse said he was on duty with P.C. Roberts near the Hale police station at about 11:30 on Sunday night, when a man came to them and said, "Have you heard of a girl being choked at St Erth tonight?" They replied, "No." He said, "There had been, and I am the man who's done it." P.C. Roberts suggested that the girl might have fainted. The man's reply was, I believe she's dead, as she has gone dark about the face and her lips are swollen." Witness detained him, and he said his name was William Hampton, a miner of St Erth. At about half an hour after midnight, Hampton was going to make a statement when Witness cautioned him, but he said, "I have been courting Emily Tredrea of St Erth since about 12 months last October. Tonight, whilst in her mother's house, she said to me, 'I've given you up. I shall not go out with you any more.' She was standing at the table eating a piece of cake and drinking a cup of tea. I jumped up from the chair where I was sitting and caught her by the throat with both of my hands and held her until we fell backwards on the floor. I held her until I saw she was dead. I'm sure she was dead, as I saw the froth coming out of her mouth. I lifted her up in the chair and ran out of the house and into the field, and then came to Hoyle. Death due to strangulation. Dr. L.G. Davis said when he saw the body, death had taken place about an hour before. The most noticeable feature was an extreme lividity of the face. He made a post-mortem examination. The cause of death was asphyxia through compression of the windpipe. There were marks on the throat showing that compression was due to external violence. It would take about 4 minutes on an average to asphyxiate her. It would take considerable pressure to close the windpipe. The verdict. The coroner said there was evidence sufficient to enable them to arrive at a perfectly clear conclusion. It was a distressing thing to happen in a small and otherwise peaceful community, and was undoubtedly a great shock and a cause of sorrow to the relatives and friends, and he was sure they would feel, most of them probably having known the girl, that it was a sad affair. Without going beyond the admissions of the accused, there could be no question that he caused the death of the girl. There was nothing beyond his own statement why he should have committed the act, and there was nothing to show that the act was in any sense premeditated, at least a short time before the act. The act of throttling on average took 4 minutes and required considerable force, and that showed that a great deal of determination was needed to complete it. The girl had a perfect right to say she would break off the engagement, and that was no excuse for any violence toward her. The duty of the jury was to return a verdict of wilful murder, and any extenuating circumstances would be considered when Hampton was placed in trial. After a short consultation in private, the jury returned a verdict of wilful murder. The coroner thereupon informed Hampton that he stood to take his trial at the next assizes for the murder of Emily Tredrea. The accused had put no questions to either of the witnesses, chatted rather affably to the sergeant of police while the jury were considering their decision, but he seemed to recognise the gravity of the situation when informed by the coroner that he would take his trial at the assizes for murder, and the previous pallor of his way gave way to a flush which denoted intense feeling. The trial at Bodmin. The case proceeded to trial at the assizes in Bodmin between the 19th and the 24th of June 1909, presided over by Mr. Justice Phillimore. The small Cornish courtroom drew considerable public attention, with every seat reportedly taken and many more queuing outside in hopes of a glimpse of the proceedings. William Hampton stood accused of the wilful murder of 16-year-old Emily Tredrea, and from the outset his defence team sought to reduce the charge to one of manslaughter, arguing that the act had been committed in a sudden fit of temper, with no element of planning or premeditation. It was, they claimed, a momentary lapse of control, not a deliberate killing. But the prosecution painted a very different picture of a man consumed by obsession, unable to accept rejection, who waited for an opportunity to confront the girl alone. They pointed to his prior declarations of intent, the violence of the attack, and his clear physical advantage over Emily. Despite the emotional arguments presented on both sides, the jury took little time to reach a decision. After retiring for deliberation, they returned in just 10 minutes and found William Hampton guilty of murder. However, in a final gesture, they added a recommendation for mercy, perhaps influenced by the man's age, his emotional volatility, or the circumstances of the relationship. It was a slim thread of hope, but not one that would hold. On the 23rd of July, the Home Office issued its decision that Home Secretary Herbert Gladstone, despite receiving petitions for clemency, declined to interview the death sentence would stand. From the Nottinghamshire Weekly Express, the 23rd of July 1909, the miner executed at Bodmin Jail. William Hampton, 23, miner, was executed at Bodmin Jail on Tuesday for the murder of Emily Barnes at St Erth on May the 2nd. The accused had been engaged to the deceased, but on her declining to have any more to do with him, he caught her around the neck and squeezed her until she died of suffocation. Subsequently, Hampton gave himself up to the police and stated he had choked the girl. Hampton submitted quietly to pinioning and walked firmly to the scaffold. The brothers Pierpont were executioner and death was instantaneous. Further particulars. In an age when a lady's dignity was considered a fragile treasure, it fell upon a vigilant constable to ensure no umbrella was opened, no hat was tipped, and no unwanted face was thrust too close without consequence. Thus, with chivalry and statute book in hand, the officer stepped forth to defend a woman's honour against such peculiar advances. From the Daily Telegraph and Courier, the 11th of March, 1909. Peculiar charge. A remarkable charge was brought under the notice of Mr. Denman at Marlborough Street when Percy Austin Tooth, 45, of no occupation, residing at St Aubrey's in Hove in Sussex, was accused of using insulting behaviour whereby a breach of the peace might have been occasioned. Police Constable Ford, 34-1C, said that at about 10 minutes to 10 the previous evening he saw the prisoner near the Albany. He approached a lady and showed his face towards her. Then he raised his hat, but the lady took no notice. His next act was to open his umbrella, although there was no necessity to do so, causing the lady to stop for a second or so. Subsequently, he raised his hat again, but as the lady still took no notice, she walked off westward. Witness arrested the accused, who at first made no observation. On the way to the station, however, he said, "Is there no way of getting out of this before we go too far?" At the station, he said, "How can I refute the police? The lady ought to be here. There is nothing in it as far as I can see." In reply to Mr. Denman, the prisoner emphatically denied that he intended to insult the lady. He didn't remember raising his hat, but he might have opened his umbrella, nor did he remember the lady getting out of his way. At the time he was walking back to his hotel. The officer, replying to the magistrate, said no complaint had been made by anybody of the prisoner's conduct. Mr. Denman was not satisfied. In the absence of other evidence that the prisoner had been guilty of such conduct as to bring him within the statute, he would therefore be discharged. The case, alas, has concluded. Symptoms of suspense and intrigue have now abated. The pulse of the tale grows faint. Should dissatisfaction linger as a persistent malady, it is recommended you address your complaints to the scriptwriter, although regrettably she has discharged herself without leave and is unavailable for consultation. However, if satisfaction has been achieved and your constitution improved by this prescription of dark delights, you are advised, strictly for the maintenance of good narrative health, to undertake the following regime. Like, subscribe and share freely amongst peers, relations, and those suffering from a deficiency of historical intrigue. Such measures shall fortify this practice against the cold indifference of the YouTube algorithm, which shows scant mercy to unattended tales. Alternatively, you could consider tossing a farthing towards the cause via Patreon. Colin promises not to spend it all on fancy pots. Find us at Patreon/News of the Times Historical Crime. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, one-time test subject for the experimental foghorn, harmonica, and still occasionally echoing.